Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this. This is MMA AM. It's half MMA show, half morning show, pretty much all BS. And I'm LK from Kocosports.net, and I'm joined by Keith from the MMAtakeover.com. Keith, thank you for joining me, and welcome to Kocosports.net.
Oh, thanks for having me. It should be fun.
We're going to be talking about UFC Fox 23, talking about a bit of CM Punk in the news and a bit of Ronda Rousey and Dana White as always. Did you catch the UFC on Fox 23 card?
Yeah, of course. I don't miss any fights. I try to watch every UFC I can.
See, yeah, that's a strange thing. MMA to know, because what I did before is with Kocosports.net, I just did the YouTube, like I was just allowed to do the YouTube channel, whereas now I'm on the YouTube channel, update the news. So I was like, I cover MMA on the news, so why don't I talk about it? And it was like off and on with MMA, and this year I've really got into it. So if I'm a bit, a bit lapse with my knowledge of UFC, I do apologize, but it's
That's
gonna
okay.
get there. It's going to get there. It's growing. And what's good about this is now we can get the MMA fans on board as well as the wrestling and people watching thinking, why the fuck isn't there a wrestling show? Once this show airs, there'll be Wrestle AM with me and Booms. We'll be reviewing the NXT and talking news. Did you watch the prelims for this show?
Yes.
Any good fights? Were there any standout fights, any standout knockouts, or anybody in particular who
Yeah.
is to watch?
Yeah. Lee Jingling versus Bobby Nash was a fantastic fight, a back and forth fight. Uh, Lee was hurt several times by Nash in the first and second round, and then at the end of the second round, he actually rallied, rocked Nash a couple times, and eventually knocked him out as the round ended. It's a really good fight. I wouldn't say it's fight of the year, but it's definitely was the fight of the night. Really good class, and Lee has, I think he's won like 6 or 7 fights in the UFC already. I don't have his record right in front of me. I can pull it up, but I mean, Nash came in on short notice, took the fight on short notice, so and it was his USA debut, and I actually thought it was a pretty good showing by him, considering you take it on short notice, and you're also fighting in Denver, which is high altitude, which is going to really suck a guy's energy. So to go deep into the second period in your debut against a veteran of the UFC was pretty impressive, even though he lost. But yeah, if you get a chance to see that fight, that's a really good one. And then if you go to the Fight Pass, which if anybody doesn't have Fight Pass, I suggest doing it because I don't know what it is in the UK, but in America it's only $10 a month. I don't know how that translates in the UK, but I'm assuming it's fairly similar, not that expensive. And the cool thing about it is you can pretty much watch any fight you want, and on that you can go back to the old time fights that I love to do, and then also you can watch the Fight Pass prelims. And there was a fight. Alexander Pantoja and Eric Shelton was a really close fight, really good one between two pretty good prospects at 125. So that's actually two. Those are two fights on the prelims to watch, and then there was a couple snoozers to stay away from.
See, that's the thing. See, with wrestling, it's like, okay, that's a good or bad match. With UFC, I found, with MMA in particular, I find it quite difficult to separate the good from the bad because sometimes I enjoy a fight, whereas the person next to me saying that was boring, and everyone's into different things. So I think it would be good for opinion. And I watch the main fights on UFC on the Fox on 23 because I have 17,000 different things to watch from fucking 15,000 different companies. So UFC on Fox 23, opening match for the featherweight division. We have Alex Caceres versus Jason Knight. What were your overall thoughts on this opener?
Well, it really set up it really set up Jason Knight. Jason Knight was kind of at a pivot in his career. He's won 3 fights in a row in the UFC, and it kind of set him up against Alex Caceres. Caceres is basically a gatekeeper with a pretty solid name, and it's because of his nickname, Bruce Leroy. He's got the big hair. He's actually pretty well rounded. Doesn't have many weaknesses, but on the flip side, he is not a title contender, so he's kind of that guy. If you beat Alex Caceres, you could move into top 15 and be an actual contender. If you lose to Alex Caceres, it kind of sets you up. So he's kind of like that bar to know. And Jason Knight a lot of people, they call him Hick Diaz because he reminds a lot of people of Nick Diaz, but he's from the South. He's not from Stockton, so he's an in-your-face pressure fighter, um, solid stand-up, but his jiu-jitsu game is really good, which is pretty funny because you don't think of jiu-jitsu when you think of the deep South of jiu-jitsu is more on the coast. The best jiu-jitsu gyms in America are on the coast, and then obviously Brazil, and then some parts of Russia. You have the sambo, which is similar to a mixture of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. But his ground game is fantastic. Like he took down Caceres, who actually went to the distance with Uriah Faber, and he actually went the distance with Yair Rodriguez. So there's two guys that he fought deep into fights, and Jason Knight took him out in the second round by rear naked choke, and he dominated. Once he got it was a pretty even feeling out process in the beginning round, but once he got the takedown in the about halfway through the first round, he just dominated the rest of the fight, and he called out a pretty big name in the Korean Superboy that just fought Cub Swanson in the fight of the year last year. So he's making big things. He's not scared to call people out, and he's really exciting guy. I really like this kid, Jason Knight.
Yeah, I enjoyed him. I liked Caceres as well. He kind of felt like that guy who's never gonna be, like you said, a championship contender, but more of a guy who's on the shows because he's entertaining and he's fun to watch. So people tune in. It's like if you got a card of good fights, but they may not be entertaining, you just shove him on because he was very entertaining to watch from where I was standing. But the end came when Knight got the one with the rear naked choke. I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. And like I said, he called out Doho Choi, ranked 11. Where do you see Knight? Do you see him in the top 10 anytime soon or moving up into the top 15? Because I don't know how the rankings work, but I went on the UFC website to check once I watched the show to check if the rankings are updated where with the various fighters moving up and down. And it took a while. I don't know if it's done now, but it didn't really look like it was actually done or not. Like, does it take a while for the actual rankings to go up?
Well, they go up usually by midweek. I think it goes up by Wednesday because they usually have it up by the UFC tonight, which comes out Wednesday here in America. So I'm assuming that would be probably early Thursday morning for you guys, or really really early Thursday morning, or really late Wednesday night. I don't really follow the UFC rankings that much because our website has our own rankings. That's the MMATakeover.com where we have our own rankings, but our rankings are not only UFC fighters. They're from any organization, whoever we think is the top
Okay.
10. So pulling up our top 10 and kind of going through our list, I don't see him cracking the top 10 now. Um, but if he does get a matchup with Ho Choi and he wins that matchup, that would at least put him probably in our honorable mention because Ho Choi is in our honorable mention list right now. And the way we do it, we have 10 guys who all submit our top 10s, and then we just average them together. And then whoever's been nominated by a writer for our website but didn't crack the top 10 in the average, then they fall down to the honorable mention. So that was our rankings that offered Ho Choi. But we also do ours once a month. So by next month, maybe someone would put Jason Knight, and he'd probably crack our honorable mention. I'm not ready to put him there yet because Alex Caceres, like I said, he's too inconsistent. He wins one fight, he loses one fight, but the talent is there for Knight that he could. I mean, he's pretty talented. He's pretty well rounded. There's not a big weakness. His biggest weakness is probably his striking defense. He's kind of like he's known to be a fighter. He wants to get in a fight. He wants to get hit. And he kind of throws defense out of the way. Now, if he goes against say Yair Rodriguez or someone like that, he might be taken out with a much better striker than Alex Caceres.
So his match with Doho Choi will probably be the biggest fight of his career up until that point. Like if he wins that, he could be in future title contention, and if he loses, back down to the back of the barrel.
Yeah, and the one thing about MMA, it's not like boxing. Like one loss won't end you. You can lose multiple times and still fight back. You'll get a guy like Stipe Miocic, who's a heavyweight champion. He got knocked out by Stefan Struve coming up. He lost a close decision to Junior Dos Santos. And his career was over. I don't think there's a champion in the UFC right now other than Joanna Jędrzejczyk that's undefeated.
Is it
So
all about? Sorry, go up there. Is it all about how you lose compared to how much you lose?
yeah, I think how and obviously to who. And where in the career you are. Losses early in the career obviously doesn't matter as much. You take a guy like Conor McGregor, who obviously is the biggest star in the sport. He lost twice before he's even in the UFC. One guy that most people never even heard of. So, um, it's not like boxing where there's a lot of feeder systems where the guys who are stars they feed against lower level guys. A lot of guys, if people are fans of boxing, they switch over to MMA. They might look at a guy with an MMA record and be like, "Oh, well, how's this guy so good? He's, 13-4. That's not a good record because in boxing, you're probably 20-0 before you even enter yet. If you don't have that 15, 16, maybe 20-0 before you even get that contention. So Jason Knight is probably, I don't know, I don't have his record right in front of me. I can pull it up real quick. See if I can find his record. I know he's got some losses in his career, and he's young. Um,
I think he was only
Shots.
24, isn't it? If I'm correct, he was 24.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, he's definitely young, which is really impressive. That yeah, he's 16-2. So at 24, he's actually got a lot of experience. 18 fights at that age is actually a lot of experience, and obviously it's a really good record for MMA, 16-2. Um, and at 24 is you're probably not even hitting your peak to 27, 28. And the also thing that comes with that is power. He only has 2 TKOs in his career, and most guys don't reach their power until 27, 28, around that age.
So he's a guy to watch in the next few years.
Yeah. This is, I think, there's a little bit of a coming out party for him. He's going, get his obviously the biggest win of his career so far. He took out Daniel Hooker's another guy right before Alex Caceres that he beat. That's a pretty good, solid fighter. So I mean, he's 3-1 in the UFC right now.
Yeah, and you were talking about Yair Rodriguez. I caught his fight against BJ Penn, and then I read online that he's done. Is he suspended? I only caught like a brief little look online when I was scrolling through my Twitter feed. Someone said something about Rodriguez suspending after the BJ Penn fight. Is that just bullshit, or is that truth?
No, I haven't heard anything about a suspension unless they're talking about a medical suspension, which happens a lot in fights. Which I'm assuming. I don't think they're talking about like a USADA suspension. A USADA suspension is sorry, is a I just got a text from a fighter. Sorry. A
That's all right.
USADA suspension is a something like an anti-doping or basically some kind of supplement they took that wasn't improved. I haven't heard anything about Yair Rodriguez in that. I'm assuming it's somebody who looked at a medical suspension when they have a doctor, they could find like a little injury in there. And it's basically these medical suspensions mean nothing. Anybody who gets knocked out, they automatically get a 6-month suspension until they get a doctor approving them to fight, and doctors do that. So he might, obviously he wasn't knocked out, so his would be a little different, but it would probably see something maybe something is. I know he said he talked about a knee injury before. They could have found some swelling in the knee. They could have found anything very minor thing that he probably got some kind of small suspension that he has to get a doctor's approval beforehand. But that happens all the time.
So
If you
there
look,
is a difference between USADA and just getting suspended by your doctor, example.
yeah, well, the suspension comes from the athletic commission. So wherever they're fighting. So say like this weekend they're fighting in Houston, and there is, I believe, there's 12 fights. So with 12 fights, that's 24 fighters, obviously. I would say at the end of the night, out of the 24 fighters, about 15 or 16 will find some kind of minor suspension until they get approval from a doctor, which they get all the time. It's not a big
But
deal.
that means, so for example, say your Rodriguez got suspension for 6 months from the state. Does that mean he won't be able to fight in that state only, or does that count as the whole of
No,
America?
it goes by the commission, like you said, on a technical sense. But most of the time, commissions honor other commissions' rulings. For example, one guy you can talk about is Rashad Evans. Rashad Evans was supposed to fight Tim Kennedy in New York, and when Diddy did the pre-testing, they found uh, something wrong with his brain. I'm not a doctor by any chance, but something didn't look right in their brain, so he didn't get a fight license. He didn't get licensed to fight there, and then they tried to reschedule him to fight in Toronto, in Canada, and because he failed a test in New York, they automatically suspended him too. So that's something you'll see a lot. Like if a guy gets suspended in one athletic commission, the other athletics will uphold the ruling of the other athletic commission, and that also happens with suspensions for um, drug suspensions, obviously USADA suspensions, and all that.
Okay, thank you. Then we went to a heavyweight division match. We had Andre Arlovski, who's ranked number 7, versus Francis Ngannou, ranked number 10. I really, really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it. It was shorter than I anticipated, but
Yep.
it was enjoyable. I did really enjoy it on this one.
Well, this is really matching. This is actually a really a passing of a torch type fight. Andre Arlovski is a former heavyweight champion. He's at the end of his career. Um, he the one thing about Andre Arlovski that's been basically his entire career has been a weak chin. Now he's always been a great athlete. He's been well rounded. He's got a good jiu-jitsu game. Obviously, very good boxing, what he's known for. But the first thing that goes on fighters is not the skills; it's usually their chin, and it's usually not the. And let me rephrase that. It's not the chin that has given away because your chin doesn't get weaker. What happens is your reflexes slow down a little bit, and you get hit with a shot before that you didn't, and it puts you out. And his just chin is gone. And now when he gets hit, he goes out a lot. And Francis Ngannou, he's 30 years old and he has 11 wins, but he's only been fighting MMA I think for 2 or 3 years, or maybe it's less than 5 years. I don't have it exactly in front of me. I think he made his debut. Yeah, he made his debut 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, and he's fighting in the UFC, knocking out a former heavyweight champion. Francis Ngannou is he came from, I think it's Cameroon, and then he now lives in France. And this is a guy that his last fight against Anthony Hamilton, he's so green or so new to the sport that he actually learned a type of Kimura in the back during warming up for his Anthony Hamilton fight, and then went out and actually hit it on him in the match when he just learned it like 10 minutes prior. He's so green, but he's one of these natural like freaks, like has it. BJ Penn, when he first came up, was kind of that way too, where he just blazed through. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, won a world championship for an American, was the first one to do it. And he did it with being like in jiu-jitsu for something like insane, like 3 years, 4 years. When most guys would take them 10 years just to make it into the tournament. Um, and another guy that Francis Ngannou reminds me of, and I don't mean it, and it reminds me of the actual styles of fighting, but just the story, is John Jones. John Jones was the guy that was fighting for 6 months and then was in the UFC, and then a couple years later won the belt. So Francis Ngannou is a guy that everybody is excited about, and everyone thinks that if this guy keeps improving at the way he has, and he just keeps improving. I mean, his fight against Anthony Hamilton, where he submitted him, and then going to Andre Arlovski, that is a huge step up in competition. That is not a guy. Um, the equivalent would be going from. Let me think. Well, yeah, I'm not gonna do that because I don't know uh, British. I don't know what a good soccer player would be, but it would, or a good football player would be in England. But it would be basically probably a bench player to like a
Regular first team player.
yeah, a first team player who maybe at one time was a star, but is kind of hitting the end of their career. Um, I
Okay.
don't. Is that Rooney? Is Rooney like a guy that's hitting the end of his career?
Yeah, he's kind of getting benched a little bit. It just depends on how he's playing and how the game is, really.
Okay, so yeah, the equivalent would probably be beating Rooney in a comp or being better than Rooney, but going from a guy that's not even in the Premier League,
Okay,
like
so yeah, so a lower division. So a lower division going all the way up.
all the way up to taking out a former star in a
Okay.
fight that a lot of people were worried about if he could make that step up, and he just doesn't hesitate, took him out quickly, and did it with flying colors. And that is my
He
best.
just yeah, because it was just a
That I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
go on.
That's my best European football analogy I can come up with. That's
Dude, I do not have time to watch football. I will catch the highlights on a Saturday night if I'm lucky. If it's not watching wrestling, it's watching MMA. If it's not that, it's updating the site. Then it's work, and then you got to be a friend, and then you got to be a family. Then you got to be then I got to be a good boyfriend, and it's just so much going on. So I don't have time to watch as much soccer as you Americans like to call it. And you know what? It was a good knockout as well because he got him with a jab, then he got him with another one. He went for another swing, the bastard, and he just fell to the floor, like you said, reflexes from the chin, and then he just got on top of him. Bam, bam, bam. Referee stopped the match. And the question is, where do you think he'll go from there?
I mean, there's a lot of the heavyweight division is wide open right now. You have Stipe Miocic, who's the champion, and then there's pretty much everybody else, and because of so many factors. You got Cain Velasquez, who is one of the most talented I've ever seen. He does it all. The only problem is he just can't stay healthy. He's had some extremely bad luck with training. He's out hurt again. He was supposed to fight for Vicio Verdum. Verdum, obviously, he's former champion, one of the best all time, but I think he's 38, 39 years old. He's at the end of his career. You got Junior Dos Santos, who's fighting Stipe Miocic, another guy who's kind of at the end of his career. Josh Barnett, a guy who's at the end of his career. Ben Rothwell, a guy. There isn't many like guys in their prime right now. There is a new influx of guys coming up, but they're not in that top 10 ranking yet. guys like him, guys like Derek Lewis, who's fighting Travis Brown, Curtis Blades, a guy that literally the one I just told you that just texted me is Justin Ledette. He just texted me, but I'm reaching out to him on a certain story. He's a guy, an undefeated heavyweight that people should be looking out for. So, but these guys aren't near the title. Then they're still way down. So Nagano is probably the furthest prospect along of these. So he's got to step up to that next level and take on one of these guys who's in the top 10. I do this thing every Monday where I write a thing called Who's Next, where I just play matchmaker, and it's not me predicting who's gonna fight, but it's me saying, hey, if I was in charge, who would I match guys up with? And I matched him up against Bren Rothwell. I think that would be a good matchup. A veteran who's well rounded, and would offer him some things to look at. One thing is Ben Rothwell's a very big heavyweight, unlike Arlovski. Arlovski's a little smaller. So to see how he would handle someone that could probably match his power. Um, but I would expect Ngannou to win that fight.
No, I expect him to fight someone in the top 5 because Arlovski was 7. So I'm guessing he'll go down and
Okay.
then Ngannou will go up. So I'm guessing someone in the top 5, and if he wins that, maybe get a. I don't know in MMA if they do, because I know in the main event it was ranked number 1 versus ranked number 2, but they used an analogy that was different. Pro wrestling, what I'm used to, it's okay, you have the top 2 rankings, they have a number 1 contenders match, and then they go on to get the championship match at the pay-per-view. Whereas here it was in the main event it was number 1 versus number 2. And I was like, okay, is this a number contenders match? But then if number 2 wins, how will she go up to number 1? Does that mean she'll immediately get a title match? It's all very confusing. Is the ranking system stuck to, or can it be a loophole if there's a big money fight they want to go for?
The money fight, well, it's not like boxing where you have these mandatory challengers. It's really up to the discretion of the matchmakers and the UFC president. There's no set way. You would like to be the number 1 contender match, have these, but number 1 contender matches have been skipped many times. Guys who have won. One thing I can think of right off the top of my head is Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar beat Chad Mendes for a number 1 title contender match. Was supposed to be fighting Conor McGregor, and McGregor obviously jumped up to 155 and fought Nate Diaz instead. Right now you have Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he's lined up against a match against Tony Ferguson. They're ranked 1 and 2 in the weight class. That's supposed to be for the interim title. The winner of that match is, you would think would face Conor McGregor. But Conor McGregor might do boxing. He might fight Nate Diaz. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean. I mean, you take a guy like Junior Dos Santos, he's getting a title fight over Fabricio Verdum, even though Verdum is ranked ahead of him, because Dos Santos last gave Miocic, the champion, a loss. So that they can market that a little bit better than they can market Verdum, who recently lost to Miocic. So it's really on a market what they can sell. I mean, take Michael Bisping's last title defense. He fought Dan Henderson. I don't even know if Dan Henderson was ranked in the UFC top 10. It's just that he had a devastating knockout over your countryman Michael Bisping at UFC 100. It's probably the worst loss of Michael Bisping's career. So to give him the opportunity to avenge that, it was something they could really sell, to the casual fans. The casual fans always run everything. Hardcore fans like myself, I'm always going to watch. But the casual fans, the guys who only watch 3 or 4 pay-per-views a year, whatever will pique their interest the most, that's what's going to happen.
I understand, but then what's the point of having the ranking system? If you're going to do that, why don't you just say, okay, look, we won't have a ranking system, we'll have fights, and then we'll just market it? Is there a point of having a ranking system? Hey, and then can you imagine that? You've been number 1, you've worked your way up to be the number 1 ranked, and you're there like, okay, this has been the 3rd straight time I haven't had my title fight. What the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Because I grew up when I was younger, boxing, it's English, it's always on the damn television.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, those rankings are really strict. Now, this year and the late part of last year when I got into MMA, it's kind of been a lot different. And I'm like, okay, he's number 1. Why aren't you fighting for the title next? And it's just really strange to me.
Truthfully, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know why they have it, because they don't follow it, and I really can't give you an answer. They don't follow it.
I think why they do have it, for example, the Arlovski and Ngannou, fucking butchered his name, rank 10 versus rank 7, in the viewer's eyes, it's, oh, okay, whoever wins this will move up. So it's kind of interesting match, some emotion, and a reason to have the fight instead of fighting for the sake of fighting, which is a very hard pitch to sell.
Yeah, that could be the reason.
Potentially. Let me move on to Donald Cerrone versus Jorge Masvidal. I enjoyed this fight. Again, like the other one. I tell you what, though, there was a knockdown. And Cerrone, when he got back up from the chair, the referee should have stopped the fight. Cerrone got back up. He looked defeated, that poor man. He looked absolutely defeated. It was just one punch from Masvidal, knocks him down, consistent punching until the referee ends it. The referee should have ended it after the first round.
Yeah, so this is a really strange fight. It is a well, let me give you some backstory to this. Donald Cerrone is one of the top welterweights in the world. Obviously, I don't know what he came ranked in this. I think he was in the top 5, top 7, like that. He also is a guy that has been very successful with lightweight. He moved up. He had a run in lightweight, almost won the title, ended up losing in the title fight. After that, he went up to welterweight. Jorge Masvidal has always been one of these guys that has had really good talent, but has never lived up to it. And Jorge Masvidal challenged Donald Cerrone, and if you know anything about Donald Cerrone is a true fighter. He wants to fight as much as he wants, and he'll never back down from a challenge. He's kind of a fan favorite because of that. A lot of people love this guy, myself including. I don't know anybody who doesn't like Donald Cerrone. But let me give you some more backstory on Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal is basically another Kimbo Slice but is good. Jorge Masvidal grew up in Miami, the Miami area in Florida, and he grew up fighting people in the backyard for money. Like he'd show up and he actually fought a guy that was in Kimbo Slice's crew for money. He showed up and fought like the smaller version of Kimbo Slice and won. Then he ended up turning to MMA a very long time ago, probably 15 years ago. And the thing about him is he's always been really close to beating guys. But he always cruises. He has his tendency to let guys off the hook and then lose decisions because he gives up the last couple rounds. So it was finally nice to see him finally go in and show his talent and go in for a finish. And this is definitely the biggest win of his career. Going to the stoppage, the thing about the stoppage is it looked to me that the referee is Herb Dean. He's one of the most famous referees in MMA history. He might be the best referee. He's at least on the short list. And he stepped in. It looked like to me that he stepped in to stop the fight. And then the buzzer came up. It was very close. And the buzzer went off. And then Cerrone recovered. They had the second round, and then Masvidal put him out. Knocked him, flirted him, then eventually put him out. I was worried that something that earlier happened this month would happen. There was a fight in Invicta, which is a all-women's MMA league. It was a fight between Amy Montenegro versus Selena Haga. Let me tell you kind of what happened. Selena Haga had Montenegro hurt, similar, where the fight was about to be stopped. It was submission, and the girl tapped out right as the buzzer ended, so they let the fight go on. Gets to the third round, and now it's reversed, and the other woman has a submission on the girl, and her head is down, so the referee can't see, but she actually passes out, and then the round ends. The referee comes in. Oh, round ends, and when they check, the girl's unconscious. But the referee says because he didn't see the girl unconscious, it goes to a decision. And the girl who ended the fight unconscious actually gets the judge's decision and wins the fight. So I'm really thankful that we didn't have a controversy like that Masvidal was able to put him out in the second round, that we wouldn't have Cerrone come back and win. And I was actually starting the fight rooting for Cerrone because he's one of my favorites. But a really, really good win for Masvidal.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And then post-fight, he says basically he's a real fighter and wants someone who can actually beat him. I thought that was a little bit insulting. He may not have meant it in that way, but to me, it was a bit insulting to poor Cerrone.
Yeah, well, we're in this different age where you have to market yourself, and it's either to be loved or be hated. So if you're not going to be loved, you might as well be hated. So I think that's what he was trying to sell himself as the bad guy. There's been a lot of guys that have been considered the bad guys, and it's helped them marketing. Tito Ortiz is one of them.
Hmm.
Michael Bisping. I think Tyron Woodley is kind of doing a little bit like that. Conor McGregor is one of these guys who's you either there's no middle ground on Conor McGregor. You either love him or you hate him. Ronda Rousey, you either love her or you hate her. But if you do this narrow in between, you don't really get the fans. So I think that's might be what he was trying to do.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it. Wasn't bad. And then the main event for the bantamweight division, you had Valentina Shevchenko, ranked number 1, versus Julianna Pena, ranked number 2. Apparently Pena. I don't know if the commentators, don't know if you heard or not, but they said that she injured her shoulder during round 1. Now, was it smart to carry on, or do you think she should have said, "Look, I'll fuck my shoulder up"? And B, is there been news on what she actually did to her shoulder, or was it just tweaked during the first round?
Yeah, I haven't heard exactly what happened in the shoulder, but this stuff happens all the time. People enter fights with injuries, or they get injured through fights. I mean, it is a brutal sport. I mean, you have sports like American football, European football, baseball, basketball, whatever. They get injured. Um, but this is the only sport, or I mean, one of the only sports where your intentions is to hurt people. I think
Yeah.
this is the only sport where your intention is to break a bone. You win a match by breaking the person's bone, or you win a match by putting the person unconscious or choking them out where their blood stops going to their brain. So obviously, when you have a brutal sport like that, you're gonna have injuries. Um, she's in a number one contenders match. She's trying to get a title fight. She had to keep fighting through that, whether she's injured or not. She had to.
I guess when because if but she lost anyway, so she could have saved the heartache and said, "Look, I'm fucked," and then they could have done. They like their marketing. It's like, "Oh, rematch, Valentina Shevchenko, Julianna Pena." The last time it got stopped due to injury. Will it happen again? They love their marketing, but the match ends when Shevchenko was on the mat. She had really good defense, and then she got the win with a cross arm breaker, or an arm bar, as UFC call it, with a submission win. I really enjoyed that. Now, I was shocked. This isn't sexist in any way, shape, or form, but I was just shocked that this women's match was the main event. Like, obviously, you got the Rousey and the Holmes and the Nunes that are going to be the women's main event. But when I saw this, I was like, okay, do I just not know anything about these women? Should I know something about these women? And I do now. And I'm going to be honest, watching the women fight is actually more enjoyable than I expected. Because, I've watched the Rousey fights. Everyone watches Rousey fights, but like when you watch, sorry to keep talking about wrestling, it's just that's what I've been covering for about 3 to 4 years now. With wrestling, when the women come on, the majority of the time, not to be offensive, you go make yourself a coffee, you go make yourself a tea, or you go for a piss.
Yeah.
Here, you don't want to because they fight like men. And I think wrestling has done a good job these past year or two of watching these women, how they market them and treat them like stars. And I think wrestling promoters should watch how UFC, how all these promotions market and treat these women. I think that's what they should do because that was probably my fight of the night. I was just emotionally into it because of the number one contendership, because Nunes was ringside, which really helped the story. I was just really into it and I thought it was a good fight.
Well, let me give you some backstory why you can kind of they were the main event. One, they are the number one, number 2 in the weight class rankings to fight each other. So that's obviously one reason why they were higher ranked. Masvidal was barely in the top 15 in the UFC rankings, so that's why the co-main event wasn't above. Excuse me. The second reason is some of the backstory. Taking Valentina Shevchenko, who ended up winning. Everyone knows Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey's first loss in the UFC was to Holly Holm. Holly Holm's last fight lost to Valentina Shevchenko. So you kind of do, A beats B, B beats C kind of thing. And so she had that going in, heading into this fight. Now, Valentina Shevchenko's last loss was to Amanda Nunes, who's the champion. They fought before. But in Amanda Nunes' last 4 fights, there's only one person who took it to a decision, and it was Valentina Shevchenko. And it was a 3-round fight instead of your championship 5-round fight. Amanda Nunes won the first 2 rounds, and then Shevchenko was starting to tee off on her in the 3rd round and won the 3rd round. And most people would argue if you had a 4th and a 5th round, the way that fight was going at the time, she would have won the decision. Now, mind you, training for a 3-round fight and a 5-round fight, it's different. And the different fights, you can't just say, oh, if it's a 5-round fight now, she would automatically win. But Valentina is a world class kickboxer who also is a judo black belt who obviously showed off her grappling. Uh, Julianna Pena entered that fight. I mean, if you see her out of the fight, she's a very good looking girl, which this is, where we live. You being attractive obviously helps you get marketability, but also she's good. I mean, she hasn't lost a fight. That was her first fight she lost in the UFC. She was a former The Ultimate Fighter reality show winner. Um, so she had that going to her. So and then there is a stylistic matchup where she could have challenged Amanda Nunes if they fought. So I think that's what they wanted. Then also the fact that with Ronda Rousey losing, they don't have that one true appealing woman that transcends the sport like Ronda Rousey does. Ronda Rousey transcends the sport. My mom knows who Ronda Rousey is. My mom's never watched UFC in her life, but she knows who Ronda Rousey is. So they need to build other stars. They have to find the girl that's going to transcend the sport because you brought in such a women base that'll leave with Ronda. So I also think that's another reason why they market in the women. And
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 it was like a go on.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so you know, there's fights coming up um, this weekend, and there's some good girl fights on. Jessica Andrade versus Angela Hill is a really good one. Tisha Torres, Beck Rollins is a good one, and then there's Felice Herring versus Alexa Grasso. All three of those girl fights are really good. All six of the girls are good fights. And so if you're into girl fights, this weekend coming up in Houston's a really good card.
It's a pay per view, correct?
No, not this weekend. The weekend after is. This weekend it's free.
Oh, okay, yeah,
I,
because
I mean, I don't.
is that
Well, I don't know if it's free in America. I don't know if it's different in England. I'm assuming it's the same. It's on the we have it here on Fox Sports One. I don't know what it is in the UK.
it's strange. The pay per views are usually on BT Sport, which
Okay.
is a paid subscription, and they're usually most of them on BT Sport, but sometimes they miss one or two. So I don't. Is if not, I'll watch it online. I have no problem watching it
Well,
online.
I'm
There's
assuming it's
there's ways to
free.
find it.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's free in the UK because it's not. I mean, it's some good. The girl fights is about three of the best fights on the card.
Okay, oh, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, that'll be good. I'm looking forward to that. And then we went on to a post match. Shevchenko, she went on to say she's excited to become, she literally said she's going to become the new champion. Nunes is actually in the ring. They argue, and then they end pretty much with the promo war. Decent build and marketing. They can use that clip to market in the future. It's just wrestling takes stuff from MMA, and MMA brutally takes stuff from wrestling. Like that
Yeah,
is
of course.
if it wasn't for pro wrestling, mixed martial arts wouldn't be as popular as it is today. And vice versa, it could be the exact same thing. And I think that's why I think the UFC and WWE don't go to war particularly because they both kind of need each other in a way. And it's just a strange one because obviously, I'm just getting into MMA. What's your thoughts on pro wrestling as more of an MMA expert? Like, for instance, I classify myself as like a hardcore pro wrestling fan. I watch the Japanese, the Mexican, the English, the American, all the pro wrestling. You know, and just getting into MMA. What are
Okay.
your thoughts as an MMA guy on pro wrestling?
Well, I don't watch pro wrestling. I did as a kid, um, but it's funny because the way I became an MMA fan is because of pro wrestling. I'll tell you a real short, quick story. Um, at UFC 6 is the first UFC I ever saw, and it was because my uncle Joe he had a we call here where I live we call them a hot box or a black box. It's just like a cable box where you could get pay per views for free, and I used to always
Huh.
watch. Back then it used to be called WWF, and this is when Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and I
Yeah.
don't the Undertaker and all these guys are the biggest guys back then, and he used to tape the pay per views for me, and he used to get on a VHS, and I would watch it on VHS. That's how long ago this was. And then one day he's flipping the channels and he sees this preview for UFC 6. I didn't even heard of it, and he goes, "Oh, I think my nephew would love this." So he videotapes it for me and gives it to me. And that's the first time I ever watched mixed martial arts, and that was because I was a WF fan, and he saw the similarities,
Yeah.
the combat. Um, One thing I could say is the crossover appeal. there's a lot of people who follow mixed martial arts who follow MMA. Obviously, there's a lot of people who follow uh, pro wrestling who um, doesn't follow MMA. Obviously, there's that, and then vice versa. People like me who watch MMA don't follow
Yeah.
wrestling. But you have these stars that have been in both. You have like Brock Lesnar. You have CM Punk coming over. Going back further, you had Ken Shamrock
Yeah.
and Severn, and then you got Bill Goldberg is a huge fan who's always at the UFC events, and Kurt Angle is a guy that's talked about getting into it, and then uh, Batista is a guy who's done some MMA, and Bobby Lashley's a guy who's doing pretty well in Bellator. So I definitely think there is a that competition level to it, and not to mention that WWE athletes are obviously, or just all pro wrestlers in general, are fantastic athletes. And they're
Mm.
chiseled and they're strong. So I know a lot of them come from a collegiate background, collegiate wrestling background. So I could see why how it would be appealing to both sides if you're, and I can see why there's a lot of MMA websites that or websites that cover both sports.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we are at Kocosports.net. Whereas, because before, like I said, I was just on the YouTube covering the pro wrestling, and now it was like you can join fully now, and it was okay, cool. Now I can actually do MMA because I didn't want to come on here and just cover it. Like for instance, I wouldn't come on here and do an MMA show by myself because I'm just learning the ropes.
Yep.
Like I like having guests on here who are like inside MMA, like really smart MMA fans, that they can kind of teach me their ways and talk to me about MMA because I can't listen to other podcasts because if I do that, then their opinion becomes my opinion. Whereas if I have a co-host, I
Sure.
can kind of bounce off, which is fair
Yeah.
enough.
Okay.
And here on the Coco Spots, we do Wrestle AM every day, and we do MMA AM like 3 or 4 times a week. So if you'd be interested, maybe once or twice a week, you can come on and we can break down the UFC or the Bellator, whatever fights.
Yeah. No, this was a lot of fun. I was having fun doing this.
Awesome.
I,
We're
I could
good.
talk I could talk
Go
MMA
on.
as much as you want. I will always talk MMA with anybody. I love it. It's my number one
Awesome.
passion. It's what I'm most passionate about in life is MMA.
That's good to hear. We'll get to a little bit of news, and you can give your thoughts on these
Sure.
news. We have Jimmy Manua versus Corey Anderson
Yep.
will be on the 18th of March show at the O2 Arena in London. Apparently,
Okay.
according to that, it's a Fight Pass exclusive show. Why is
Yep.
that?
So what a fight pass is the equivalent. You probably get it. Fight pass is similar to the WF. I think the WF has a subscription based website. I think they have it. I don't know what it's called, but I think
Yeah, it's the W Network. It gives you access to every pay per view. You get every pay per view, every video ever made by
right.
WWE ever on there. It's $9.99, which I guess is similar to
Okay.
Fight Pass.
So the same thing with Fight Pass. The only difference is you don't get pay-per-views, but they put these live
Okay.
events, so it'd probably be the equivalent to a pay-per-view, and it's only if you have a Fight Pass subscription, and it's their way of handling commercial. There's no commercials. There's their way of they don't have to worry about paying out networks and this and that. And if you ever catch a Fight Pass, it's fun because it goes a lot faster. You don't have to worry about commercials and kind of pumping it out. So a show that if it's on Fox Sports might take 6 hours can be done in 3.5 hours with Fight Pass.
Yeah, it sounds good. Can you get it on PlayStation 4? Can you get that on the app?
I'm assuming, yeah. I don't know. I don't do it. I do it on my computer, but I'm assuming so.
Okay, cool. Because I like watching it on television. But yeah, that's quite interesting because it's in London in the O2 Arena. That's a big building. Pretty sure that'll be a good atmosphere. Bellator past Friday night did 720,000 viewers. Is that good for because I know Bellator did 1.3 for the Ortiz and Sonnen fight,
Yeah.
which what we were on Ortiz Sonnen. Did you actually catch the fight?
Yes. Yes.
Of course, of course. Do you think that's a work, aka scripted, or do you
Absolutely.
think that's legit real?
I believe it was legit real.
Okay, cool. Because there was
One
lots
thing,
of bickering. Where was it a work? Was it real?
well, one thing people got to remember. Well, there's two things about that fight you got to remember. One thing about a work, if someone at work, now that there's gambling on these sports, that you're allowed to gamble, you can go to a Bovada or a Five Rail, whatever website of your choice, and you can gamble on it. You can go to jail for working. The fighters can go to jail. If a promoter is involved, they can go to jail. And this is serious. It actually happened in boxing where a promoter went to jail for fixing fights. The second part is if Bellator was involved in a fixed fight, why would they have the guy who's retiring win? the guy who's setting out. You'd want the other guy to win. You want the guy that's continuing his career to win. Not. This has really killed the stock of Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen came in a fight. He hasn't fought in 3 years. He was supposed to win this fight. Most people expect him to win. I thought he was going to steamroll Tito Ortiz, and then he loses. I don't think it was work. I think Chael Sonnen has always had an issue with submissions. That's what's always been his weakness. You look in his fight against Anderson Silva when Anderson Silva was the best fighter in the world. He was beating Anderson Silva for 4.5 rounds. He had 2 minutes left, and he ended up getting caught in a submission. That's what happens with Chael Sonnen. That's what he does. That's his weakness. I don't think it's a work. If you want to see real works, ones that have go check out Don Fry versus Ryan Hall, and then see if you think this matches up. Or go check out Oleg Taktarov versus I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. The names. Sorry, I'm just going off the top of my head. But there's real works MMA. This I don't believe this is a work at all. It doesn't.
Okay, that's just fair enough.
Go.
It's probably just hurt wrestling fans claiming that when MMA. I always find it so entertaining when wrestling fans and MMA fans getting to wars on the social media. It's like, oh well, your sport's fake, and then ours is like they're like, no, yours is scripted. It's the most entertaining thing to watch in the world. It's absolutely hilariously entertaining. We'll go to some live comments before we wrap up. We've got Ewok from Endor says, not an MMA fan, but here for Koco Sports. Very interesting insights, though. Good job, guys. I want to see more. Chauncey Bullock says, hashtag beat up Donald Trump. And Ronda Rousey is an... yeah, we won't talk about that because you don't want to get kicked off. Chauncey Bullock then says, Ronda Rousey is an obsolete mule. She'll fade away and classify herself as obsolete. Not a big Ronda Rousey fan there, Mr. Chauncey Bullock. We got a little story about CM Punk before we wrap this bad boy up, because I want to see what your opinion is on it.
Okay.
Where are we? That's Amanda Nunes. We're in an interview of... There we are. CM Punk. He said he's working hard on getting his next fight and is throwing names for opponents at Dana White, and he said he'll continue fighting even if his next fight isn't in the UFC. A, do you think he'll get a fight? B, do you think he'll be with UFC?
Well... From my understanding of CM Punk is that he's under contract for another fight, so they might have to give him another fight. I don't know the legal aspects of things, if there's ways out, but he's a star. And let me tell you a story. The fight that was the night that CM Punk fought, the main event was Stipe Miocic versus Alistair Overeem for the heavyweight title. And I was at a busy bar where I always watch it. Me and my friends get together, we watch at this bar, and it was it was busy. But there was a big crowd of people that was going crazy when CM Punk came out. And when that fight was over, this crowd left. And it was a lot. It was a big crowd. It was probably 20, 25 people in this bar that left all at once. The UFC loses an opportunity of those people viewing in. Because obviously they're not MMA fans. They're pro wrestling fans. Does that mean – I mean, you get the spectacle side, argue with the sports side. Will they do it? I think so. But let me tell you something about CM Punk that you probably are not going to expect me to do, and a lot of people, the hardcore MMA people, wouldn't say what I'm about to say. I give him a lot of credit to leave the sport of wrestling, put your pride aside, and fight a guy and basically get embarrassed. That takes a lot of balls, and I give him credit for that. And I remember watching, they had like a documentary of like his year of training. And when it first started, I wanted to root against him. I wanted to be like, so who's this buffoon coming in? It's not like he's like a Brock Lesnar who had a NCAA championship background in wrestling or one of these guys. He had nothing. And I wanted to dislike him. But the more I watched the documentary, I was like, wow, I really like this guy. This guy's a nice dude. And then I watched like his interview. I listened to an interview afterwards with Ariel Helwani, who's a huge big broadcaster in MMA, and I listened to an interview afterwards, and he was really humble, and I was like, wow, this is a nice guy. And when I was watching pro wrestling, he wasn't around. I don't even know who this guy was. I had to actually, there's two guys on our staff, I had to ask them, like, hey, how big of a star was this guy? Was he like a main eventer guy, or was this guy? And they're like, oh, no, this guy was main, because he's not that big. I was shocked, because, most time you think of WF, you think of Triple H and muscles coming out everywhere. He wasn't that big of a guy, so I was surprised. And they were like, no, this guy was like main event in WF and WrestleMania and stuff like that. So I was like, oh wow, like when they give up that and to get punched in the face, I mean, I give him credit, and I'm actually
Yeah,
rooting
and
for him.
yeah, me too. There's lots of again, as I can imagine, lots of MMA. I feel sorry for him because he has the wrestling fans rooting against him and the MMA fans rooting against him. He really had balls because half of the audience is like, "Fuck you, punk! You traitor! You left us. We paid your wages, etc., etc." And then there's the other half who's like, "No, he got treated like shit. He didn't like WWE because it's a bullshit monopolization of a company. He went to go
Yeah,
and fight MMA, which was his passion as well. He can knock off two passions. You don't want to be on your deathbed and say, oh, I had two passions. I only did one. I wish I did the other. He can now say it. I think they're going to save it for a Chicago fight night. I
the
think they'll do a pay-per-view, Chicago
yeah
pay-per-view.
the actually reminds me of you go way back in the day with Ken Shamrock,
Mm,
when MMA was not as to the popularity as now, and Ken Shamrock wasn't making the huge money that the MMA fighters are making now. He left MMA and went to WWF, and there was a lot of similarity where I was watching back then. A lot of MMA fans was like the same thing, like screw you, dude. You're leaving our spot to go to WWF. And then when he came back, he eventually came back, and he actually lost a lot of his prime years. He spent a lot of his prime
mm.
years in the WWF. When he came back, he got a lot of hatred because of that. A lot of people thought of him as a betrayer, like you know.
It's sad when you look at the two. There's so similarities. There's a few, right. For instance, MMA is more brutal on the body, but with that being said, they fight 4-5 times a year. These guys are on the
Yeah,
road 250 to 300 days a year, taking
yeah,
bumps on their body, getting hit. So there is similarities, and I think that wrestling fans and MMA fans should just get along. Because I guarantee you, if you showed an MMA fan, like if I showed you a New Japan match from Japan, you'd be like, "That's amazing. That's hands down amazing." And if you showed just a normal wrestling fan an MMA fight, they'll be like, okay, that's really good. I think it's
yeah,
they don't want to portray their sport is kind of
yeah.
what I think it's actually come down to, which is actually a really sad state of affairs, but it's just the world we live in, isn't it? It's quite scary and sad. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Do you want to plug yourself before we go off air?
Yeah, just my name is Keith Keith Schillen. I'm the founder of the MMATakeover.com. That's the THE MMA Takeover.com. We're a brand new website. We're only about 2 months old, but we're cranking out some great material. We have opinion pieces, news stories, polls, trivia. We have our own rankings, schedule pages, debates. We do our own videos. We have podcasts. We do anything. We have tons of interviews. So yeah, check us out. We're on. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I appreciate you guys just giving me the time and watching this. I really appreciate it. I had so much fun.
Good. I enjoy myself too. And I put your link to the website in the description box below. So if anyone just wants to quickly click it, it's right there. The link's on the website. He also has a YouTube channel where he interviews mixed martial arts stars. And I'll probably give you a Twitter message and you can come on next week and we'll cover the UFC from the weekend fight.
Okay, sounds good,
Uh,
man.
Awesome. No problem. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back literally in about 10 minutes. We'll be doing Kocosports Wrestle AM. We're going to cover the NXT show that literally finished an hour and 10 minutes ago, as well as talk about the news of Seth Rollins' injury. Lots to do. Also, check out Kocosports.net as your home for combat sports and where it's okay to be a passionate fan of both mixed martial arts and pro wrestling. With that being said, thanks for joining me today, Keith. Stay safe, stay
Thank you.
golden. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll both be catching your asses down the line.